Hi, this is Mrs. Kidman, and in this video, we are going to be discussing how you can solve polynomials using the quadratic formula and get real and imaginary solutions. So the quadratic formula is awesome, and before you moan and groan about it, we're going to break it down, so hopefully it won't be too bad. However, you should have learned the quadratic formula at some point in your life. Now, some people learn a little song. You might hear something like x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a, right? That's one example of it, right? So a lot of people will learn that way. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Now, depending on who taught it to you, you might have learned a different version. I think I taught my students the very first time something that was like to Soldier Boy. So it's something like x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a, right? Lucky you if you were in my class. Lucky you if you weren't. Other people learn this song, this version that's by a German guy, and it's like negative b plus, or right? We can sing all of the different versions, but ultimately that's the quadratic formula. Now, rather than doing it all at once, which some people do, and it totally works for them, for me, I feel like I need to break it down. So every time I do the quadratic formula, I split it into 3 steps. Step number 1, you want to figure out what a equals, what b equals, and what c equals. Once you're able to figure that out, that's going to go a long way. So when it comes to deciding what a, b, and c are, you're going to be given a quadratics. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Now, the key thing is here, your quadratic has to equal 0 for you to use the quadratic formula correctly. So you want to move everything to one side. If you're missing something, put in a 0. Now, once you've identified a, b, and c, the second step is we're going to figure out what goes inside of the square root here. Okay, because that's the hardest part to type in our calculator. It makes things confusing. We just want to be able to do it. So you are going to calculate your b squared minus 4ac. Now, I found it helps a ton to just put parentheses and fill in those numbers. So I'm going to put b here, minus 4. I'm going to put a there, and I'm going to put c here, right? So I can just fill those gaps right in there as I get that. Now, once I figure out what that answer equals, I'm going to take that answer and I'm going to put it into the last thing. So our last step is this whole formula, but it looks a little bit simpler because I'm going to take the square root of b plus or minus the square root of, or negative b plus or minus the square root of whatever I got for answer number 2, right? Divided by 2 times a. And we can just fill those right in there. Now, once you have these steps, it will tell us our answers. Now, this plus or minus symbol here is what gets a little bit weird. This actually means that we're going to get 2 answers from it. We're going to get negative b plus the square root of whatever that is over 2 times a, and we're going to get negative b minus the square root of whatever that is times 2a, right? So both of those answers will come out. Now, you can simplify them sometimes, and sometimes you can't, and we're going to run into those imaginary numbers yet again, and it's going to be fine. But what we want to do is be able to solve this. So let's go through. We're going to do 3 examples using this expanded way of the quadratic formula so that we're able to find the solutions here. So let's take a look at our first example. So very first, before we do anything else, anytime we do the quadratic formula, we need to decide what a equals, what b equals, and what c equals. So in this case, a is going to be in front of the x squared. So our a is going to be 1. B is going to be the number in front of x, so negative 6, and c is our constant, so 5. Perfect. Okay, step 2 is I need to calculate my b squared minus 4ac. So I'm going to fill in these parentheses here with what I need. So I'll put in my b, which is negative 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 5. Now, you guys, you have graphing calculators. Don't be afraid to use them. You can type this in exactly as it's written, parentheses and all, into your graphing calculator, and it will always calculate you the right thing as long as you type it in with those parentheses. If you type it in without, we often end up making silly mistakes. So as you type that in, you're going to end up seeing that this equals 16. So then we'll come over here to step number 3. So as we do step 3, remember, is the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of this thing divided by 2 times a. So we're going to do our opposite of b plus or minus the square root of this thing divided by 2 times a. So this is a, this is our b. Remember, our b here is negative 6. Our answer inside our square root is a 16, and a ended up being 1. So let's go ahead and simplify this one out. So as we're looking at it, negative b here, this piece, turns into a positive. So really I've got 6 plus or minus. Now type in the square root of 16 into your calculator. If it comes out nice, awesome. If it doesn't come out nice, we want to look at it. So 16 is positive. As you take the square root, you end up seeing that it equals 4. Now this plus and minus here is what tells us that we're going to get a positive 4 and a negative 4, but we write it all at the same time. Then we're going to divide this whole thing by 2 times 1, which is just 2. Now this would be our answer, but we want to split it up and get both of those other answers. So this actually gives us 2 answers. It gives us 6 plus 4 divided by 2, and it gives us 6 minus 4 divided by 2. Now you could stop here, but you guys are smart enough. Let's go ahead and just simplify that. So 6 plus 4 is 10, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. So one of my answers is going to be 5. 6 minus 4 is 2, divided by 2 is just 1. So my other answer gives us 1. So do you see how we can use that quadratic formula there? We're going to run through all of those steps. Now I'm going to do it again. We're going to move just as fast. Hopefully it's not too fast. If it is, you can slow it down. But we are going to go through this next one again using that same process. Okay, so let's start. We've got step number 1 here. We want to figure out what A equals, what B equals, and what C equals. Now I'm going to draw a line down here so that we know where we're at. So our A is going to be this first piece here, so 1/2. B is going to be in front of our X there, so we get a 1, and our C is a -10. So our second step is we want to figure out that B squared minus 4AC. So I'm going to type that right into my calculator, right? So we've got our B goes right here, minus 4 times A times C. So as we look at this, B is going to be 1, A is 1/2, and C is -10. So let's type this into our calculator exactly as it is. Now, as a quick reminder, on your calculator, you can type in a fraction. You are just going to click the green alpha button. And then that's going to be followed by clicking the gray button next to it that has an X, T, theta, and N, right? So if you click those buttons in conjunction, so alpha and then that, it'll give you a little fraction. So as you type it in exactly as it's written there, we have 1 squared minus 4 times 1/2 times -10, and we end up getting an answer of 21. Okay, so with that solution of 21 there, what we want to do is now move ourselves on to step number 3. So that's where we do the opposite of B plus or minus the square root of this answer divided by 2 times A. So let's go ahead and fill those in there. So we've got the opposite of B, and our B again was 1, plus or minus the square root of what we got up here, which is 21, divided by 2 times A, and our A was 1/2. So now let's go ahead and simplify this. -1 is just -1. Sweet, winner. Okay, plus or minus the square root of 21. When you do the square root of 21 in your calculator, you're going to get 4.5, right? We don't want those fractions. We don't want those decimals. So you're actually going to leave your answer here as plus or minus the square root of 21 divided by 2 times 1/2. So when we do 2 times 1/2 in our head, in our calculator, whatever way you do it, you end up getting 1. So what we can do here is we want to end it by splitting up our answers. So we're going to get a -1 plus the square root of 21 divided by 1, and -1 minus the square root of 21 divided by 1. Now, when you divide something by 1, it's just itself. So we actually can write this as -1 plus square root 21. And we can write this bottom one here as -1 minus the square root of 21. But I would also give you full credit for writing these answers here because obviously you know what you're doing, right? So we want to be able to use it that way. Now we're going to take a look at one more example. As we go over this one, there are a couple key things to make note of here. First, you got to make sure it equals 0. Does this one equal 0? No. So we need to move that piece to the other side to make sure that we end up equaling 0. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides. So now I've got 5x squared minus 4x plus 1 equals 0. If you don't move it at first, your A, B, and C are not going to be the right answers, the right letters, and you're going to do all the work for nothing, right? So even if you show me that right way, you're still going to miss that silly mistake point, and nobody wants that. So now that we have it ordered, we want to go through and use our quadratic formula. So step 1, we want to figure out what A, B, and C are. So A is going to be 5, B is going to be -4, and C is going to be 1. Okay, step number 2, we want to do our B squared minus 4AC. So using my parentheses here, got my B squared minus 4 times A times C. Now, as we put those in there, B is -4 A is 5, and C is 1. So we can type that right into our calculator. Remember all your parentheses there. This is a very specific one to include your parentheses on. Anytime you're squaring a negative number, you want to make sure you have those parentheses because our calculator reads it a little bit differently. So in the end, you should have gotten that this equals -4. Okay, so we get this answer of -4. Now we get to go over and do step 3. So step 3 is going to be the opposite of B plus or minus the square root of this guy, all divided by 2a. So then from there, what we want to do is solve it out. So we've got the opposite of b, and b in this case is -4, plus or minus the square root of -4, because that's what we got over here, divided by 2 times a, and a was 5. So let's go ahead and take a look at this one. When we have minus a negative, it switches to a big old positive. So we're actually going to have a +4, plus or minus, okay, this thing right here. We've done it lots of times. Anytime you see a square root with a negative inside, so square root of -4, we are going to see this as I times the square root of 4 and negative I times the square root of 4. But you guys, what is the square root of 4? Exactly, it just equals 2. So really what we have here for our answers on these two here is we're going to get 2i and -2i. So as we go to write this for our answer with our square root of -4, it's going to become plus or minus 2i. From there, what we want to do is divide it by that denominator, which is 2 times 5, or 10. Now we have both our pieces here, but we want to make sure we get them split up. So let's go ahead and split that up into our 2 separate pieces. So you're going to get 4 plus 2i divided by 10, and 4 minus 2i divided by 10. Now I would give you full credit for these. Bam, bam. There is one other way that you could simplify it. What does 4, 2, and 10 all have in common? They have a common factor of 2. So you can divide 2 out of all the pieces as long as it's out of all 3. And this actually ends up giving you a 2 plus I over 5 and a 2 minus I over 5. Right? So these answers will work. The answers in the green boxes also work. But don't forget about those imaginaries when you're solving these. So that's how you can solve a quadratic using the quadratic formula. And this is super useful whenever you run into a quadratic that you can't factor using the X games. So I would definitely recommend making sure you know how to do this. So again, we start by saying what a, b, and c equal. We put in that b squared minus 4ac. We go through and put it into the last part of our quadratic formula, and we simplify it. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. But there you go.